Hi there, folks. Today we're going to talk about the mathematics lens. So, what is mathematics? There are many formal definitions, but as a discipline, mathematics is perhaps best understood as a lens through which we explore the world around us. But there isn't just one such lens. Every branch of mathematics brings its own perspectives, its own way of seeing, and when we apply those different perspectives to even something as simple as a tree, we begin to see just how varied those views can be. So, let's consider the tree. When a mathematician sees a tree, what exactly do they see? The thing about mathematics is there isn't one way to see the tree. So let's instead consider how different mathematicians might view the same tree. When an early student of mathematics sees the tree, their initial thoughts might be something about numbers or geometry. Or they might look closer and consider the patterns involved. Are there patterns in the leaves or symmetries of some sort? Perhaps a rudimentary drawing might provide additional insight into what makes the tree a tree. And at that point, the tree is as much art as it is mathematics. After all, shouldn't the tree belong to biology anyways? When a math historian sees the tree, they may consider the age of the tree and the different maths which were created throughout its life. Is it a tree Euler might have seen, or more of a Mandelbrot era tree? Or perhaps the math historian might consider how mathematicians of different eras might view that same tree. How might the ancient Greeks, Babylonians, Chinese, and Native Americans have viewed the physicality of the same tree differently? And what mathematical tools might they have available? When a number theorist sees the tree, they might try to encode the structure of the integers into the different components of the tree. Perhaps every branch is assigned a value, perhaps every leaf. Do Fibonacci values or other recursive sequences appear in the various structures? And this is just one tree. Are there others? A number theorist might see value in the tree and all of its neighbors. When a set theorist sees the tree, they think about the individual parts of the tree and how they are organized. What hierarchy exists in the physicality of the tree? And how can we mathematically define objects such as leaves, sticks, or branches? Once those foundations are established, we can consider how their interconnections can help define the structure as a whole. When a topologist sees the tree, they might consider what the tree looks like to an ant on the surface or to a squirrel in the nest. What defines the space of the tree and which of its properties remain unchanged as it bends, stretches, or grows. They consider the tree as a malleable object, one that can be deformed without breaking. And in doing so, they focus less on its exact shape and more on its essential connectedness. Whether bonsai or old growth, so long as no branch reconnects to form loops, the underlying structure remains the same. When a graph theorist sees the tree, they think about all of the parts of the tree and how they are connected to one another. The leaves, branches, trunk, and roots become vertices and edges, and the geometry quickly falls away. The physical tree is merely a representation. The combinatorial structure is the object of study. But more than that, they also think about how it is connected to the ecosystem and environment at large. The weighted and directed graphs, which describe the cycles and rhythms of the tree and its place in the world, are what truly drives a graph theorist. When an algebraist sees the tree, they might consider the different transformations and symmetries which are acted upon it. What aspects of the tree change as it goes through its annual cycle of seasons, and what operations might be defined upon it? Even as the tree grows and changes, the algebraist looks for the underlying structures that remain invariant and for the operations that reveal it. When a geometer sees the tree, they look to all the many shapes and structures that make them up. There are many three-dimensional and two-dimensional structures that come together to make up the physical space of the tree. And in analyzing the variance of each branch and leaf and the angles and structures in play, they can gain a greater understanding of the space it takes up. They may also consider why it has grown this way. Is it for light optimization or some other natural reason? When an analytic geometer sees the tree, they may consider how all of the edges define curves of various types. Are they parabolic, sinusoidal, logarithmic? What types of equations might define such curves? And what characteristics of the tree might lead to such curves? Perhaps they might even want to define curves in 3 dimensions to better model just how curvy things can be. When a student of calculus sees the tree, they consider how it moves, grows, and otherwise changes. How does it grow? How does the wind move it? Where did the sapling originally come from and how did it end up where it did? To a calculus student, the tree is ever changing, and it is only through looking at a micro and macro level that these changes can truly be understood. When a measure theorist sees the tree, they may consider some notion of size and structure, or perhaps as the sum of its parts. How do we consistently measure the length of a branch, the spread of a canopy, or the distribution of mass throughout the tree? As the structure becomes more irregular, the question is no longer just how to measure it, but how to do so in a way that remains coherent across the entire object. When a chaos theorist sees the tree, they consider how unique that true tree really is. While many may consider all trees of a species similar, the chaos theorist focuses on all of the slight variations and considers all of the things that may have led to its uniqueness. Biological distinctions, the blowing wind, an ancient flood, a squirrel which found a comfortable crevice. The chaos theorist sees the beauty in how all of these things came together. When a logician sees the tree, they may consider how to define it precisely and what follows from that definition. What properties must a structure satisfy to be called a tree? And once those properties are established, what truths can be proven about such trees? Each branching point suggests a sequence of possibilities, and the logician is concerned with which conclusions necessarily follow and which do not. When a game theorist sees the tree, they consider the tree's current state in terms of the different agents that interact with it. A logger, like a conservationist, and the surrounding ecosystem each move in different ways, with competing goals and incomplete information. Each branching point represents a choice, each path a sequence of strategies, and the outcomes depend on how these competing interests play out. The tree becomes not just an object, but a game in which decisions and incentives shape its future. When a statistician sees the tree, they may look more towards the forest to determine if the tree is typical or an outlier. They may look to the data to better classify it, or maybe looking to better understand or challenge another person's classification. Ultimately, the mathematics a statistician uses can be used to tell a story about the tree, but the interpretation must be critically considered and analyzed by the reader. When we now look back and ask how a mathematician might view a tree, it becomes clear that mathematics is not a single way of thinking, but a collection of tools and perspectives that allow us to explore the world in different ways. The tree itself has not changed, but the way we understand it has. And in that shift of perspective, we begin to see not just the tree more clearly, but the true breadth of mathematics itself. I wonder how we might apply this perspective to other ideas.